Welcome back to the second part of the Which Evolution You Should Pick Advanced Eevee Guide, Part 2. Yesterday in Part 1, we talked about your healers that you could choose, Sylveon and Leafeon. We went through a lot of complex considerations, so for today, we're going to take it easy. Well, in terms of the easiest to analyze skill, I think we'll all agree that Charge Strength is probably the easiest. The only evolution that has Charge Strength as a skill is Espeon, so that's the focus for today. So, Charge Strength M, that should be a pretty easy skill to analyze. Basically, every time you trigger, you get Snorlax a certain amount of strength. These will be adjusted for the area bonus, and really it all just comes down to how frequently you can trigger that skill in terms of how good it's going to be. And the more speed and skill trigger, like skill trigger M, skill trigger S, main skill chance up, and inventory you have on a skills focused specialist like Espeon, the better the total triggers on that skill. Now at the start of the game, I'd say that a lot of people agree that Charge Strength M is a meta relevant skill. It is a powerful skill. I think we were all misled. We were all misled by this letter here. Charge Strength M, M standing for medium, right? It's gotta be at least better than Charge Strength S. As it turns out, we were wrong. In some situations, Charge Strength S can actually be better than Charge Strength M, and I'm going to prove that to you in a moment. But first, let's take a look at which Pokemon has Charge Strength M, and we compare Espeon to all of those to see which one comes out on top. Currently, there are only 3, and they are Ampharos, Sudowoodo, and Espeon itself that have this main skill. And we're going to head on over to skill trigger analysis to see, well, which of these 3 have the best total trigger. And we're going to use Espeon as our base Pokemon, and we're going to leave it at level 1 and basically just base stats, and we're going to compare it to Ampharos and Sudowoodo. And what these numbers will tell us, if it's green, is that this Pokemon is going to be better at that skill trigger because it'll trigger more throughout the day than if it's red, because it's below 1.0. I also like to put Espeon itself on as well, because what that allows me to see is to make sure that Espeon compared to itself is 1.0. Occasionally I do make mistakes. I might accidentally, and the reason why I like doing that for skill trigger analysis is that sometimes I make mistakes. Sometimes I accidentally click like a higher level on a Pokemon, and then if I come back down here, I can see that my Espeon has gone to 0.9, well, because the base Espeon to compare with has leveled up. So then I'll come back here and adjust and make sure everything is in check, and then you'll see that again my Espeon down here for comparison is back to 1.0. It's just to make sure the control is accurate and that I haven't made any mistakes when I do this analysis. And yep, I've confirmed that it's all good, and now I can see that Ampharos wins out in terms of the amount of skill trigger, and Sudowoodo is much worse. But the difference is very marginal, so I'd say that if you really want an Espeon for that main skill, it's not like you're losing out by much by not using Ampharos instead. But also, Espeon has currently relevance because it can be used at Lakeside for double berry strength. Whereas Ampharos, being electric type, there's no current favorite berry island. Now we can see these numbers in even more in depth if we go to team analysis. And once again, I've inputted just level 1 of these Pokemon. And we're going to compare Ampharos, Espeon. We're going to come back to Psyduck, Golduck in a moment, and Sudowoodo. Now the first number that you'll see is that Ampharos has a larger number, in other words the total strength, than Espeon, and by a lot. Well, there's actually several reasons for that. First of all, at base, the calculator will immediately put Ampharos as 2 evolutions. So if you caught the Ampharos as it is without evolving, you should actually go to 0. Because what happens is this number 2 will get added down to the main skill level. And so will the number of main seeds that you used. So right off the bat, because Ampharos is naturally level 3 for main skill, it's already an unfair comparison. So instead what we can do is you can see that my Espeon is level 2 for main skill. What I'll do is I'll add 1 main seed for it to be on level playing field. But of course, because of the lack of evolution, it's gonna cost you more in order to invest in an Espeon. Again, making Ampharos the better choice. But let's be fair to Espeon and give it that extra main seed. And you can see the numbers closing in a bit, with Espeon now rising to about 6.8 thousand total strength. Now you can actually see the breakdown of the strengths if you click into the Pokemon. And just a quick summary of what all these numbers mean. This is how likely that skill is going to trigger for every production or every help. And every help occurs every 24 minutes. These numbers are adjusted for the energy of the Pokemon. So this is not the base speed of the Pokemon. And because it's evolved twice, you can see it's got a larger inventory than Espeon, which is slightly less. And then this is the berry strength, the ingredient strength, which we're going to ignore. The reason that I'm going to ignore ingredient strength is that it will fluctuate a lot based on which dish type that you picked in your settings. So if you picked curries, for example, then herbs are going to see more use. So you can see that it's 1.3 thousand ingredient strength. But if you choose a dish type that doesn't use herbs much, then you can see a drop in the ingredient strength. And because this is a very complex consideration regarding ingredients and it varies from week to week, we're going to completely ignore the dishes in this analysis. But I will mention that if you have both Ampharos and Espeon, you should choose whichever gives you the correct ingredients, because otherwise they're largely the same Pokemon anyway, unless you're at Lakeside, because you will get double berry strength for Espeon. So then the main focus is how many times a day that Pokemon will trigger and the strength that you get from that. And as we expected, based on the skill trigger analysis, Espeon is a little worse than Ampharos at the same skill level. Of course, a lot worse if you can't invest those main seeds to make Espeon better. Now, one way to ignore ingredient strength is to go into the Pokemon and tick always full pack, because a Pokemon cannot farm ingredients when it's always got full pack. But unfortunately, that also removes any skill trigger, because always full pack, meaning the carry limit is reached, then a Pokemon cannot trigger. So with always full pack, it's not going to apply for our current analysis. It's really just going to apply for any berry focused analysis. Hence why we're just going to focus on the skill trigger number, and for now ignore everything else. And let's take a look at Sudowoodo. Once again, we're going to be fair and we're going to give it a main seed for comparison. And once again, out of the three, Sudowoodo has the least amount of total strength. And that's because it triggers the least amount of times per day. So actually, despite it having a higher skill trigger rate, that is per production, because of its slow speed, it works out to be worse overall for this number of skill trigger. But its advantage is that its berry type is relevant to Taupe Hollow, whereas the other two are not. So once again, evolutions, as you can see, they are a jack of all trade, but a master of none, because Ampharos tends to be overall better. But what is really weird, and it wasn't until recently that I found this out, is that they both suck compared to Charge Strength S in the right circumstances. So what we're going to do, I'm going to add Golduck, which is a skill specialist for Charge Strength S skill. And once again, to be fair, we're going to give it one main skill seed. And what we see here is that Golduck gets a higher skill strength than either Espeon or Ampharos. These Charge Strength M Pokemon getting 4.7 thousand skill strength compared to the Charge Strength S of Golduck getting 5,000 total strength. So what the hell is going on here? Charge Strength S should provide less. And no, it's not because of RNG. It's not because it's a variable rate, because this is an average. It's actually because Golduck has a massive skill trigger rate. So at every production, it has a 12.5% chance at base level, with no skills, no nature, to trigger the Charge Strength S. Whereas in comparison, Espeon only has a 4.4% chance. So even though, yes, Golduck is slightly slower and produces less strength per trigger, it does it 3 times more, which you can see summarized down here. It triggers about 5 to 6 times a day, whereas Espeon just 2 to 3 times. And on average, it works out to be better. The only catch though, is that in order for you to get this kind of number, you will have to log in multiple times a day more than when you're running Espeon, because in order for the Golduck to trigger 5 times, you at least need to log into the game 5 times. But that's not accounting for the fact that there's going to be some randomness to this. So sometimes you log in, you're not going to get a skill trigger. Sometimes you log in, if you do it quickly in succession, it's going to trigger multiple times. So unless you were logging into the game frequently, we're talking about 8, 9, 10 times a day, you might miss out on the skill triggers, since skill triggers cannot be banked more than 1 at a time. So yes, while Golduck can be better, it is situational to whether you can actually log into the game enough to collect its skill. And if you were wondering, all of the Charge Strength S Pokemon are listed here and also here. Now, just in case you didn't know, there are 2 types of Charge Strength S. One is a set number, again adjusted for area bonus. The other is a variable number, but it averages out to be about the same. So with all that complexity going on, some having a higher skill trigger rate, some skills trigger more, like Charge Strength S gets less than Charge Strength M per trigger, and then you have to deal with the inventory, and then you have to deal with the speed. How do we rank these Pokemon in terms of who's the best for Charge Strength? First, let's take a look at Pokedex. And we're going to filter for all the Pokemon that do Charge Strength S and also Charge Strength M. So there are 3 skills that we need to pick, and we only want to see the final evolution of each one. Then let's take a look at skill trigger rate first, and this rate is per production. And Golduck sits right at the top of this list, doubling the second highest in skill trigger rate. So as we said before, Sudowoodo, for its skill, is high per production, but because it's a slow Pokemon, overall it works out to be less in strength. On the other hand, because Golduck can trigger twice as much as Sudowoodo per production, and it's faster than Sudowoodo, which is not shown here, it explains why Golduck can actually get even more strength than, say, Espeon, because compared to Espeon, Golduck triggers 3 times more likely per production. Of course, you got to adjust for the fact that Espeon's actually a little quicker. And also, we need to look at adjustments for Charge Strength M being slightly more than double the power, the strength provided than Charge Strength S. It still works out that, as you saw in team analysis, that Golduck sits at the top. What we now want to look at is skill strength, because we want to adjust for the speed, the inventory, the actual skill itself in terms of how much strength it provides, whether it's Charge Strength S or Charge Strength M. And we can see that, well, right now, Ampharos sits at the top. Hang on, isn't that opposite of what I just said? Shouldn't Golduck sit at the top? Well, this is where you understanding the calculator very much helps you analyze this situation. This ranking is based on the fact that Ampharos has evolved twice. Therefore, because its main skill is counted as level 3, it provides more strength compared to Golduck, which is level 2. Whereas if we hypothetically give Golduck an extra skill level with a main skill seed so it matches Ampharos, then it actually becomes better, which we did see when we did team analysis. So you can do that over at team analysis. You just can't do that in the Pokedex here. So don't be fooled by this ranking because it's not a fair comparison. If you were to compare them all at level 6, then the skill strength is best with Golduck. Now, there's an unfair bias towards these Pokemon here because, well, actually they're not skill specialists. And while we're here, let's talk about them as well. Let's now remove any skill specialists because generally skill specialists about doubles that of other specialists in terms of their skill trigger. We now want to look at what about Chance Strength S on other types of Pokemon, so berry specialists. As it turns out, in terms of the triple evolution Pokemon, Feraligatr sits right at the top. So if you were ever wondering whether it's worth spending a main skill seed on your Feraligatr, and you were worried that, well, it's a Chance Strength S, which sounds like a weaker skill, well, I'm going to tell you now, it's not a waste as long as whatever you use, so let's say this Feraligatr sits on the team every single week. The more you use the Pokemon, the more value you're going to see from that main seed. And while I actually invested in this Feraligatr before I did this in-depth analysis, the reason for this is because, well, Feraligatr spent a lot of time over the last 6 to 8 months on my teams. I carried it everywhere with me. So the 2 main seeds I invested earlier on, well, has given me a lot of value in return by triggering these Chance Strength S. And now I know it sits at the top of all the skill strength compared to other Chance Strength S specialists that are triple evolution. Now, I haven't actually compared any of the double evolution Pokemon with Chance Strength to the triple evolution because those would be short 1 seed. For example, Abomasnow is at the top of the double evolution for Chance Strength S. If you want to compare and contrast and see whether Abomasnow would actually beat Feraligatr, go to team analysis and do it for yourself. Give Abomasnow 1 extra skill seed and see if it improves on the strength to be above Feraligatr. Because remember, it doesn't matter how good a Pokemon is, if you're not bringing it onto your team, you're not going to see a return on your main skill seed spent. Which is why I brought this Walrein all the way to level 6 skill, even though a Vaporeon would trigger 2.5 times more for the same skill. And that's because I can use this Walrein in every area given how good its berry production is, even when it's not favorite berry for that area. And it will remain on my teams as a general berry producer until I complete the roster with favorite berry types of every area. But regardless, until you have a healer, a really good healer that's at level 6 main skill, I wouldn't start investing main seeds in everyone else willy-nilly. And so far, it doesn't sound great for Espeon. So we haven't even talked about whether the skill is that good to begin with. But already, it's worse than its competitors like Ampharos or Golduck, as long as you can log into the game frequently enough. But there is an argument that a BFS Espeon could be very powerful for Lapis Lakeside, and that's because currently there is actually no berry specialist for psychic types. These are currently the only psychic types available. This one's a skill specialist, this one's a skill, this one's an ingredient, this one's a skill. As you can see, there's not a single berry specialist. So any of these with Berry Finding S would become viable immediately whenever you need psychic berries, be it Greengrass or Lapis Lakeside. Of course, at Lapis Lakeside, the competitors would be Meganium and also Primeape, which are berry specialists of the other 2 favorite berries. So we're going to do one more comparison here is all of these Pokemon with Berry Finding S, which would be the best? Could it be Espeon? And we're going to take a look at how it compares to Berry Finding S, Meganium, and Primeape. I'm going to select Lapis Lakeside, which will provide more berry strength for any Pokemon that has the correct favorite berry, which Espeon is one, and I've given all of these Pokemon level 10 so that it can unlock the Berry Finding S. Once again, we're going to ignore ingredients because that just varies from week to week. And we're also going to ignore skill strength because some of these other Pokemon don't have the same skill, and it's very unfair to compare when they're not doing the same thing. We're just looking at berry strength. So for Espeon with berry finding S at 7,200, it is better than Mr. Mime, which is 5,700. But of course, noting that Mr. Mime has a slightly higher ingredient rate. Regardless, we're going to move on. And Gardevoir has 7,300 in berry strength, which is actually better than Espeon, and Wobbuffet with only 4,600 in berry strength. So clearly, Wobbuffet is at the bottom of this list, and Gardevoir is at the top of the berry strength if it has berry finding S. Once again, with Espeon not coming out on top in berry strength. It used to be until Lapis Lakeside released with Gardevoir's debut. And now what if we compare Espeon with berry finding S at Lapis Lakeside to the other two berry specialists that are Meganium and Primeape for Lapis Lakeside? Can the combination of its skill strength and the fact that its favorite berry for berries do better than the other two options? So Espeon totals in skill strength and berry strength about 10,500. Meganium at level 10 with berry finding S totals at 10,000, 12,500 in total strength if we ignore ingredients, which makes Meganium better. And then we got Primeape with, again, berry finding S at level 10. It gets 9,000 plus 800, so about 10,100 in total strength. So this is interesting because Espeon, even though with berry finding S it only gets ×2 berries, actually because of its skill, it totals to more strength than a berry finding S Primeape at Lakeside, but only very slightly. But neither will beat Meganium at Lakeside. So once again, we find another evolution that can fit into niche scenarios, where say you never really found a great berry finding S Primeape. Well, you could invest in a berry finding S Espeon that also has good skill trigger, good inventory, and it might work out to be better than a Primeape, but not quite there at a Meganium. Although I would say it's far more expensive for you to be spending all of your Eevee candies into an Espeon and not actually spend your Mankey candies that you might have farmed over time, preventing you from investing in another evolution. So what was meant to be a very simple discussion about Espeon's main skill, Charge Strength M. It's meant to be so simple, right? It's meant to be top tier. It's meant to be just apply strength to Snorlax. What was meant to be simple turned out to be a lot more complex than we thought, which is why these videos are done in so many different parts. If you want to see part 3 and part 4 and all the following evolution in-depth analysis, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button.